Hello class, it's Mrs. Poffenberger, and today's lesson is going to be on Chapter 1, Human Body and Orientation, Part 3. And in Part 3 we're going to look at regional terms, body planes, and body cavities. So we're going to start here with regional terms, or also referred to as body landmarks, and we're going to start with all the regional terms that are on the anterior part of the body. So remember, anterior is the front side of the body. So starting with abdominal. So abdominal is just the anterior body trunk, inferior to your ribs. Acromial is the point of your shoulder. Antecubital is the anterior surface of the elbow. Axillary is your armpit. Brachial is your arm. Buccal, your cheek. Carpal, your wrist. And cervical is your neck region. Coxal refers to your hip. Crural, your leg, lower leg specifically. Digital would be the fingers and the toes. They're both referred to as digital. Femoral, your thigh. Fibular, the lateral part of the lower leg. Inguinal, the area where the area where the thigh meets your body trunk, also referred to as your groin. Nasal would be the nose area. Oral, the mouth. Orbital, your eye or eye area. Patellar, your anterior knee. Pelvic, the area overlying the pelvis anteriorly. Pubic, your genital region. Sternal, your breastbone. Tarsal, ankle region. Thoracic, chest, and umbilical, navel. So looking at these anterior body landmarks or regional terms on the diagram, so looking at all of those. So orbital would be the eye, nasal, nose, oral, mouth, buccal, cheek. Cervical, your neck. Acromial, point of the shoulder. Sternal, breastbone. Axillary would be your armpit. Thoracic, chest. Brachial, arm. Antecubital, the anterior portion of the elbow. Abdominal, the area between the ribs and the pelvis, anteriorly. Umbilical, your navel or belly button. Pelvic, the area overlying the pelvis. Carpal, your wrist. Digital, your fingers as well as your toes. Pubic, the genital region. Inguinal, your groin. Coxal, the hip. Femoral, thigh. Patellar, anterior knee. Crural, lower leg. Fibular, the lateral part of your lower leg. And tarsal, your ankle. Looking at the regional terms of the posterior part of your body, so that's the back side of the body. Calcaneal is the heel of the foot. Cephalic, the head. Deltoid, curve of the shoulder formed by the large deltoid muscle. Again, femoral is the thigh. Gluteal is the buttocks. Lumbar is the area of the back between the ribs and hips. Occipital, the posterior surface of the head. Olecranal, the posterior surface of the elbow. Popliteal, the posterior knee area. Sacral, the area between the hips, overlying or near the sacrum. Scapular, the shoulder blade region. Sural, the posterior surface of the lower calf, lower leg, commonly referred to as the calf area. Vertebral, the area of the spine. And plantar, the bottom of the foot. So looking at these regional terms of the posterior body on the diagram here. So cephalic is the entire head. Occipital is the posterior part of the head. Deltoid is the shoulder or the curve of the shoulder formed by the deltoid muscle. Scapular is the shoulder blade. Vertebral is the spine area. Olecranial is the posterior part of the elbow. Lumbar is the area between the ribs and the hips posteriorly, so the lower back region. Sacral is the area between the hips. Gluteal is the buttocks. Again, femoral is the thigh area. Popliteal is the posterior knee. Sural, posterior lower leg. Calcaneal, heel of the foot. Plantar, bottom of the foot. There are 3 different planes of the body. So we have the sagittal section, which if you make a cut lengthwise along the plane of the body, that sagittal section will divide the body into right and left parts. And if you make that cut directly down the center or the midline of the body, then that's called a mid-sagittal section. A frontal section or a coronal section is a cut made along the plane that divides the body into anterior and posterior parts, so front and back, which makes sense, frontal section, so cutting the body into front and back parts. And then a transverse section or a cross section is a cut made along the horizontal plane of the body, dividing the body into superior and inferior parts. So just cutting across, like the waist would be a transverse section. So looking at some examples and diagrams here of those 3 different body planes or body sections. So here we have a mid-sagittal section. So it's a sagittal section because it's going through the body from top to bottom through the midline there, so it's mid-sagittal, and it's dividing the body into right and left sides. Frontal section is dividing the body into anterior and posterior, so front and back. Transverse section is dividing the body into superior and inferior parts. And we see these sections a lot on different scans of the body. So here's a scan of the head. That's a sagittal scan, so we can see the brain, we can see the spinal cord, we can see the vertebral column, we can see the bones of the skull in that section. Here's a frontal section of the thoracic cavity, the chest, so here's the arm and shoulder, here's the neck, here are the lungs, heart, liver. You can see lots of different structures in there. And then here's a transverse section of the abdominal cavity, and we can see the aorta and vena cava. We can see parts of the liver and spleen and spinal cord. And then looking at body cavities here, so we have 2 main body cavities. We have the dorsal body cavity. So that's more of the posterior body cavity. And then we have the ventral body cavity, which is the more anterior of the 2 body cavities. In the dorsal cavity, we have the cranial cavity, which houses the brain, so that's the space inside the skull where the brain would be. And then we have the spinal cavity, which is going to house the spinal cord, so that's the space inside the spinal column, which the spinal cord will run through. And then the ventral body cavity, we have the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity. So in the thoracic cavity, that is the space that's going to contain the heart, lungs, and diaphragm. The abdominopelvic cavity actually can be broken down further into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. In the abdominal cavity, we're going to have the stomach, liver, intestines, and other organs. In the pelvic cavity, we're going to have our reproductive organs, our bladder, and our rectum. We can break the abdominal cavity down into 4 quadrants. So the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. And notice when you're looking at the diagram, the left on the diagram is opposite of your left because you are looking directly at the diagram. So just make sure when you're looking at diagrams, they're opposite of your actual right and left, how you're looking at them. But by having these body quadrants, it's very important for surgeons when they're locating things in the abdominal cavity, maybe a tumor, cancer, cancerous growth they're looking for. If they know what quadrant it is, they can be very specific in its location. And then we can also break down the body trunk into regions. So we have 9 regions of our body trunk. So here's the right hypochondritic region. If we break down this word, hypo means below, chondritic means cartilage, and that means this means below the ribs because there's cartilage on these ribs, so meaning below the ribs. Next one in the middle there, epigastric. Epi means above, gastric means stomach, so this is the region above the stomach. And then the left hypochondritic region, so again, below the ribs. The right lumbar region, meaning lower back. The umbilical region, meaning right around the belly button. And then the left lumbar region, again, left lower back. The right iliac region would be the area overlying the ilia or the ilium, which is part of the hip here. Hypogastric region, hypo meaning below, gastric means stomach, so it means it's found below the stomach. And the left iliac region, again, overlying the ilium of the pelvis. And that concludes our lesson, and that's the end of chapter 1. So we're all done with chapter 1. Now we'll just need some practice to make sure we know all those terms. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great one. We'll see you around.